That's the big problem with Trump. We're a heterogeneous society. And for him to ride down that escalator in the summer of 15 and just out of the blue, it's Mexican rapists that are causing your problems. And now we're 8 or 9 years down the road from that. We're a heterogeneous society. The country depends on people trusting each other. Democracy depends on trust. It doesn't work. This is a heterogeneous society. And when you start poking those differences and provoking divisiveness between subgroups, and it becomes a pillar of your ideology or your political movement, then you got a problem. This country depends on the kind of trust that he is literally taking aim at. It's all scapegoating.
Joining us now on Open Book is Nina Burleigh. She's a best-selling author, an investigative journalist, a couple of books, Zero Visibility Possible and The Trump Women, among others. Okay, so there's a lot to talk about with you. And, okay, who's going to win the election? Let's start there.
Oh, my gut is not feeling good about it, but my brain is holding out for believing in our fellow Americans, that there are more of us than them.
Okay, so you're in my camp then. So you are a Harris supporter, but you're looking around at some of your friends that are not Harris supporters, and you're saying, okay, there may be more of them than us, but then you're saying maybe not, right?
Yeah, I mean,
but then again, it doesn't matter because it's the swing states, right, Neen? So
yeah, I mean, I'm right here. I'm in New York State, but I'm looking out the window at Pennsylvania. I'm right on the Delaware River. And so I go over there, I bike over there all the time because they don't maintain their roads as well as we do. So it's easier there are not so many cars. And so many of those little rural roads are just Trump sign after Trump sign. I don't have as many friends in the party as you do, but I do have acquaintances up here, and I have a conservative, I would say, a pen pal out in Oklahoma who I've become friendly with over the years. And I get updates from him. He doesn't like Trump, but he's absolutely going to vote for him. And I get updates from him regularly now about, the way that they reinvent history when they talk about, Trump is a fascist. Well, Truman called Dewey a fascist, or Harris is using joy as a logo, or the Harris fans are using joy as a logo. Well, look here, the Nazis used joy as a logo in Germany. You know what I mean? So it's just this constant whataboutism, and there's always an answer to the allegations. And then what we saw last night was, it's always with them. Well, gosh, can't you take a joke? I mean, come on.
Okay, so this is going to be released in a few weeks. So what we saw last night you're referring to is the Madison Square Garden rally, where, among other things that were said, that Puerto Rico was an island, floating island of garbage, is basically what the comedian said. But it felt like in the arena people laughed, but it felt like outside of the arena it didn't go over well, so much so that the Trump campaign had to retract it and reemphasize Donald Trump's support and blah, blah, blah. But, he creates that, right? He creates space for people to really show you their true colors. And so I guess one has to wonder, if he gets in, right? I mean, you've got billionaires that are cowering to him, right? They're telling their newspapers that they own they can't write endorsements. You've got somebody that owns, formerly known as Twitter, no problem. It's become a MAGA stream. So I don't know. What does that say to you about the society we're living in right now, Nate?
Well, I mean, I saw in my book, the novel that you mentioned, I'm a nonfiction writer. So I've written many, many nonfiction books. I've been covering politics for many years, but I'm an English major and I always wanted to write fiction. I read literature all the time. And I wrote this novel. It's very short. I planned it as part of a trilogy, and it's about disinformation and what happens to people when they start to be flooded with bullshit. And it opens with the Vegas shooting, which is one of the many, many, many horrible, hideous tragedies with too many guns in this country, but it's the worst mass shooting in America. And it's hardly ever discussed anymore, right? Because we're becoming immune and inured to this kind of violence. So, but it has provoked a ton of conspiracy theories on the right. And so the book is really about a few people in the mainstream legacy dying media trying to figure out what happened. And it's fictionalized from there forward. And, I was trying to sort of investigate and talk about what happens when the Steve Bannon, I would say a pretty brilliant strategy of flooding the zone with shit. What happens to people in a society which is flooded with shit, with bullshit, and the amount of disinformation that we become used to in this country, and that people in the hurricane, after the hurricane, talking about, well, FEMA is going to come and get your house, or gee, the Biden administration and NOAA or NASA, they created this hurricane. It's not climate change. I mean, I've got climate change scientists who say, hey, they're almost getting it. They're almost getting that this is man-made, but they've just taken like 2 steps farther, right? So what happens to a society when there is no longer this kind of central square where everybody kind of agrees that, well, we disagree with each other, but the color red is red. And other people are saying, no, but I saw, that's green, right? So when you have no longer got an agreed upon reality, what happens to people? And that's what the novel is really about. It's just about a very small slice of media people trying to work through a flood of conspiracy theories. And I think it's very relevant to what we've been dealing with here for the last 8 years. I don't know about you, but I mean, it may have been already started when Bush, when W and Karl Rove were doing their, alternate reality, or I can't remember what the term was that one of their faith leaders, maybe it was Rove, said to that journalist, Ron Suskind, I can't remember the term, but it was basically, look, some people believe, this and that, it may not be true. It may not be scientifically factual, but we have to give them their due. And that's their alternate reality. That started then. I mean, and now we're into where the Supreme Court has actually, in the Hobby Lobby case, literally legalized, put into the law that that basically privileges faith over science. If you believe that a certain medication does something to you that it actually doesn't, that's okay, because that's what you believe, right? And, that's where you get Bobby Kennedy, who was also at the Madison Square Garden gathering last night.
So a couple things. So obviously the book is awesome because it's a allegory based on truth. So it's a fiction, but it's a sort of a non-fiction of what's really going on, right? It's almost like historical fiction at some point. And but my thing, and I just want to test this on you and get your reaction. My thing is, it's always been out there, but it's now been amplified and exaggerated by social media. So we had wartime propaganda in World War II. We had disinformation that the U.S. put out. We were dehumanizing Japanese and we were dehumanizing Germans, and we were explaining to the American people our virtues versus their vices. And, Himmler was doing this and Goebbels was doing this for Hitler. And so we've always had levels of disinformation. We've always had good and bad levels of it. But am I wrong to think that it's gotten completely amplified now? And I'll just tell this quick story. Henry Luce, the founder of Time magazine, he interviewed Joe Stalin in the 1930s. And Stalin said, I'm going to destroy the United States. He said, well, how are you going to do that? He said, well, you guys are a mongrel nation. You've got a lot of different ethnic backgrounds there. We're going to insert a tremendous amount of disinformation inside the country, and we're going to destroy you from within. But what he got wrong is he didn't have the vehicle to do that need, right? But Donald Trump is this useful idiot for Putin and they've dumped all of that GRU stuff that Joe Stalin was talking about 100 years ago into the system. Okay, so what did I get wrong there? Because it ties back to your book.
Well, I don't think the only thing that I would disagree with is that I don't think that it's just the Russians. I don't think this is
Okay.
GRU, right?
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm with like Craig Unger and other friends of mine who are down with the Russians are engaged in meddling in our society big time, especially using digital media, social media, and the internet. But I also think that there are traits in our own country that make us particularly susceptible to these things. And part of it is that we're a heterogeneous society, and that, that's the big problem with Trump, that we're a heterogeneous society. And for him to ride down that escalator in the summer of 15 and just out of the blue, I still remember where I was when I heard him saying, it's Mexican rapists that are causing your problems. I can still remember that. I'm thinking, did I miss like a news story about a Mexican rapist? Like, what is he talking about? Right. And now we're 8 or 9 years down the road from that. We're a heterogeneous society. The country depends on people trusting each other. Democracy depends on trust. It doesn't work. I mean, people have done studies on this. The Norwegians, it works in Norway because everybody's white and everybody trusts each other. This is a heterogeneous society. And when you start poking those differences and provoking divisiveness between subgroups, and it becomes a pillar of your ideology or your political movement, then you got a problem. This country depends on the kind of trust that he and his people are literally taking aim at, and it's all scapegoating, right? And so I don't think that it's 100% GRU Russian stuff. I don't think Stephen Miller is a Russian agent. I think he's just a horrible, as somebody said on Twitter the other day, he's like literally the DNA reincarnation of Goebbels. I mean, he just looks like him. He actually looks like Nosferatu. But like, to actually come out and be, to say to the American people, look, all your problems, which we do have a lot of problems. There did need to be some kind of a revolt and a revolution against certain things that are going on here that we see now coming out of the right. But to blame all the problems, to scapegoat onto people who are these beleaguered, tired people coming up here who are literally going to ride bikes around New York City in any weather, delivering food to you, or working all night at a frickin' dishwashing in a restaurant in New York, washing dishes, or selling candy bars on the subway to people who no longer carry cash. And that's who you're going to blame for your problems because you're feeling disgruntled and jealous about what, how other, billionaires have all the money, or, you don't live like them, or you can't afford a Tesla, or, you don't like it that you can't call people names that your granddaddy used to call people who weren't white, that you don't like that you can't do that anymore. You don't like that there are more women in college than you because you didn't study enough, or you didn't get through school right. All of these grievances, well, let's just put them all on these brown people and these newcomers, instead of saying, let's fix some of the problems here. Let's make sure that everybody's got health care. Pretty simple thing, actually. What did they do with ACA, right? What did they do? 40 or 50 lawsuits. Some of those people are still in the House, most of them. What? For what? How much money did they say? Are they saving to take just to give the society, give people some relief? Again, all those people over in Pennsylvania, I'm looking out the window at that ridge where they've got their signs up. They don't have dental care. The doctors are few and far between. It costs a lot of money. Basic needs. This country is rich enough to provide people with medical care. And that would take a lot of the stress and strain off people, right? So anyway, I can go on forever, Anthony.
No, I mean, no, I'm listening because it's legit. You weave into your narrative the piece that you wrote about Trump and toxic masculinity, okay? Because to me, bravery and strength is not bullying. I find that that's not being an alpha male or whatever that term means. It, taking care of people and being willing to help people and being subtle with your life is more strength than bullying and bravado and all of this sort of nonsense. Tell us about that and gender playing a big role in this election.
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody knows this is the most gender separated election in history, I think, where, women are voting for Harris and men are voting for Trump, and by huge numbers. There's a divide. And well, I mean, there's some damn good reasons for that. I mean, he got elected by cynically taking, getting prayed over. He's such a germaphobe. I love those pictures of him where they've got their hands on him and he's just like cringing. They're praying over him. But yeah, he gets elected because he carries through with the promise, and he gets those judges in, and then they outlaw abortion and basic female reproductive care, and now you've got women all over in these states. I mean, I've been doing research down in Texas. You've got to drive 11 hours one way to get this surgical procedure and then drive back. like how the cruelty of it is nuts. And this is happening. And if you get, if you start to have a problem and you go to the hospital, if you've taken those pills, that's the only way you can get an abortion down there without doing the 11-hour drive. You're doing that in your house. And you know what? When I was 20 years old, and if I took one of those pills, and the things that happen to your body when you take those things, you want to be like able to talk to a doctor. It's a scary thing. And they're sitting there told, well, no, don't go to the emergency room, because if you go to the emergency room, you better not tell them what you did. It's insane. It's complete lunacy. So, and it's cruel. And it's demoralizing, and it's degrading women. And so what's happened is that kind of behavior, it's 21 states now, right? A lot of American women are in this situation, and that has a knock-on effect on women and girls in society culturally. So that opens the door to, the Andrew Tates and the Jordan Petersons and the Donald Trumps, who basically are coming out of this incredibly, I don't want to use the word misogynistic, but it's a way of looking at women that is so degrading, and that limiting women's reproductive care. And I think the next thing they're going to do is take away, contraception. That is opening the door to this kind of really, really retrograde situation for American women. And it's obvious why women would vote for Harris and not him. Yeah. Now, let's just remember, not all women are voting for Harris. Some of them are voting for Trump. And I actually, in my column last week, interviewed Celinda Lake, who's a really interesting, knowledgeable expert on women's political leanings in the United States. And I asked her, what's the deal? Like, people are always wondering, like, why are white women, there's a certain segment of white women that have voted for Trump. What are they doing? And she said, well, there are a couple things. It's still women out there who will say, well, first of all, they don't want conflict with the husbands, and the husbands are voting for Trump. So they just sort of capitulate. And they say, well, if the pollster calls, they'll say, there's this presumption that the man has more information. So they'll say to the pollster, well, I don't know anything about politics. Talk to my husband. And it's hard for me to imagine that kind of person, because I literally live in this community where we spend all of our dinners and social events with other people talking about politics. That's another thing. And I'm sure you do too, Anthony. So it's really hard to imagine who these people are, but they're out there. There are a lot of them. There are fellow Americans, and they aren't sitting around talking about this stuff 24/7. They're not paying attention. That's who is the undecided voter. And so what's fascinating, I'm getting way off the topic here, but but let's get back to the women thing. What's interesting about the women thing is
No,
that
you're not off topic.
what pierces their attention.
You're explaining something that everybody's trying to figure out. And by the way, yes, there are low information voters that are not going to listen to your and my podcast. I understand that, but there are curious people that are trying to understand this. There are students of history that are trying to understand why Jeff Bezos would quake in front of a leader like Donald Trump, like this toxic masculinity, which you find offensive, I find offensive. Is it working for Trump? Because he's got Elon Musk, roof. He's got Jeff Bezos, roof. I mean, is it working?
I like that roof, that puppy dog. Did you see Elon at the behind the podium yesterday?
So bad for him in some ways. I feel like he's got like as smart as he is and as rich as he is, I think there's like a little bit of a programming chip off,
right,
related to emotional intelligence and actually empathy for other people. So
a lot of those Silicon Valley guys do have that problem.
I'm going with forgivable on him. Bezos is definitely, in my mind, not a forgivable thing, offensible, but whatever. I mean, look, I told somebody today, if you're a billionaire, you're rational and you're ruthless. So if you kowtow to Trump, you're protected if he gets elected. And if you kowtow to Trump and she gets elected, she's an advisor to the system. So she's not coming after you.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And so they're rational. They're not, none of them are Churchillian where they're going to call him out on his nonsense. You know what I mean? You don't get to be a billionaire being Churchillian.
Right.
Okay, Nina.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Right?
It's a great point. Well,
no, but go ahead. Keep going. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean.
No.
Is it working? Is the toxic masculinity working for this man?
I think it is absolutely working. I mean, look at the younger men. I mean, there's a whole daily podcast on this a few days ago with the women and young men. And these younger men are really going all in for him. The Gen Z or, late millennial. Yeah. The younger men, 20 somethings are like, they're attracted to this. Again, because the problems that they're facing, they're all, non-college educated, are systemic with our economy, and the problems have not been addressed. So let's blame the women, blame the girls. That's because the women don't want to have babies with you, or they don't want to buy a house with you. They won't marry you, and you can't afford a house. So, blame them. And it's working. And I think also on the world stage, I think about this a lot because, Trump, some of the things he says about Harris, are kind of, our enemies won't respect her. Remember in the beginning, and he said, and you know why. Remember that? They're not going to respect her, and you know why. And he wouldn't, like, I can't say it, and you know why. And it's sort of this assumption that, like, you have to be a bully, you have to be like the biggest lion on the veldt, or have the biggest dick or whatever, and that's what Putin and the Saudis and Kim Jong Un, and that because they're like that, which we know they are, Putin is for sure, that they're not going to respect a Harris because she's not that person. She's not that. But just gotta remember, like, a lot of countries with macho countries in South America have had female presidents. I mean, Italy right now has a female leader, right? Germany, Angela Merkel was one of the great leaders of that era. I mean, NATO, the UK, Britain has had female leaders. What's wrong with us? And I think that it's yes, it does work for him. I think it does work for him. And I think that, we've got a long way to go, especially if we can become a country where you can legislate into women's private medical care. Like what they've done here is just so whack, and I'll just say, as an aside, I did a big piece for New York Magazine recently on 𝗵𝗿 Catholicism, the sect that, weirdly, Anthony, has been extremely effective in Washington. They sent some of their people in there around early 90s, and they converted, like Gingrich and Larry Kudlow, and J.D. Vance is all mobbed up with these people, and Alito, and Leonard Leo. They're all tied in with this hard right Catholic. I mean, I have no problem with Catholics, and most of my friends, when I was growing up, I grew up around Catholics in the Midwest. Most American Catholics are not down with this program. These people are hardcore extremist. Like, they want to go back to medieval era monarchy, papal states. It's absolutely nuts. And that's where J.D. Vance comes in. And J.D. Vance is tied in with these people who are literally starting to say the stuff that you would never have thought in my lifetime. My whole lifetime has been spent with abortion being legal. And nobody would say, oh, you know what? Maybe American women shouldn't vote. The single cat ladies, they're not really contributing to society because they didn't make any babies. So maybe they shouldn't vote. And those are people that J.D. Vance is hanging out with.
Yeah. Well, let me go to Joe Rogan for a second, because it's in the category. Now, I listen to Joe, and I'm going to share with you my opinion, but I don't want it to color yours, okay? I find what Joe has built to be an incredible franchise. And if you actually listen, okay, he's an inquisitive guy, and, he gives you space. He could disagree with you. You have space on his podcast. He doesn't have to be intellectually in sync with you to go on his podcast, and I thought it was a mistake that Vice President Harris did not take up his invitation, because, I listened to the Rogan podcast with Trump, and even Joe was having a hard time following what he was saying. I mean, I listened to all 3 hours.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, your weave is getting a little bit too wide, bring it back in. And so is Joe, in your mind, he's toxically masculine? Is he part of the problem, potentially a part of the solution? Where do you see him, and what type of impact do you think that Trump had by being on there? I'm gonna start first. I think it hurt him. A lot of people said, "Whoa, this guy sounds nuts on this thing."
I don't know how many people watched Joe. I watched clips of it online.
Okay.
I don't see the whole thing. But I know a little bit about him. I mean, my brother is a Bernie bro, like way out on that side, and he's all influenced by Joe Rogan. He thinks that that stuff is so Joe appeals to the spectrum, I think, or ends of the spectrum. Anyway, I don't listen to him because I don't have that much interest in him right now, but I absolutely agree with you. I cannot believe that Harris turned him down. In fact, I didn't know that I thought that they were still discussing it. I think it was a terrible mistake that if she's not doing that. Absolutely. What's his name? Howard Stern. I mean, Howard Stern was really toxic masculine. Okay. But Howard Stern also, it was an excellent interviewer of Donald Trump. And a couple of years ago, a source of mine downloaded and transcribed all of Trump's appearances on Howard Stern. Now, Stern went nuts and tried to litigate it back, but we wrote about them. I still have the printouts. And if you read them, it's like he was like Trump's psychoanalyst. That Trump said things to him that you can't believe what he's saying to him. He's talking about his mother, and he's talking about sex with Melania. I mean, stuff that, yes, you expect him to do, but also very telling. And he was really open with him. And I think some of those, I mean, for sure, Joe Rogan is, he's an important element in the media ecosystem, let's say. And in fact, in some ways more important than the Washington Post and the LA Times, right? I mean, one of these last week when they were, I do agree that Bezos, it's a craven decision, and not.
It's ruthless and rational. You don't get to be worth $100 billion if you don't do that, and you don't care what other people think.
I know, but if you once you have $100 billion, really, do you care at that point? Like how much they might claw
Just,
back in taxes? That's what I don't understand. Does Lauren Sanchez need more helicopters, or I mean, like why?
It's the scorpion with the frog. Come on, the scorpion is on the back of the frog, stings the frog. The frog said, "Why you do that? I was trying to help you get across the river. I'm a scorpion. This is what we do. We don't act like we're not scorpions when we're scorpions. It is what it is. I mean, I'm not even, to me, it's the reason why I'll never be that wealthy. I've taken a principled stand, and I find this stuff reprehensible and despicable. And I don't mind telling people why, and I don't mind framing it in the context of history. And I'm also somebody that's been a lifelong Republican. I got Trump wrong. I'm willing to admit that I supported him. I went to go work for him. People told me that I was wrong to do that. They were right, and I was wrong. But at least I'm a man willing to admit that I made a mistake. Okay? I mean, come on. And you know how many people that are elected Republicans that can't stand this guy, and then they go and support him anyway, Nina? You can't add them up.
You know more of them?
McConnell just wrote a book. Now, Mitch's book no one will read, but he just wrote a book, and he damned Trump in the book. I guess he wants that there for historical reference, but he didn't do anything to damn Trump. He could have knocked him out with an impeachment conviction. They impeached him twice. Go to the Trump women. You said something that has left a mark on me, and I want you to explain it to these viewers and listeners. You said that Trump was deeply affected by both his mother and grandmother, that they in fact had greater impact on him than people realize. So tell us what that is and why.
Well, grandmother came over, they're all immigrants. The women closest to him are immigrants, all four. Grandma, mom, first wife, third wife. Marla, Georgia, kind of an immigrant to New York, but I mean, four women speaking with accents, white immigrants, okay? Grandma comes over. She's the beautiful wife, younger wife of Fred Trump Sr., or whatever his name, I can't remember his first name, Grandpa Trump. And he's the guy who made the fortune with the brothel out in the Yukon, went back to Germany, brought his wife over to the United States, promptly dies of the Spanish flu. She's got 2 or 3 kids living alone in Queens, and he's left her a piece of property in Queens, which she manages to convert into a corporation. She calls it the Trump Corporation. That she incorporates and builds on it. And this is an incredible thing to do in that era. Women couldn't even have bank accounts. I don't know how she did it, but she's in the 20s. She started the Trump Organization. And then Fred, the son, worked like an ant to build it. So yes, Fred Trump built it, but the grandma started it. And grandma was old school, probably Nazi aligned Germans. The dad sure was. He showed up at KKK rallies and so on. Grandma spoke with an accent. She was in post-World War I Germans in the United States did not have an easy time, right? Because they were our enemy. So that's grandma. And mom comes over. Mom was a Scottish, came from a Scottish island closer to Iceland than to the UK. Her island had a lot of their men died in World War I. She was the youngest of like 10 fishermen children. Comes over, goes to work. All of these Gilded Age families in New York in those days wanted to have British, people from the British Isles working as nannies and butlers and maids. And so there was this whole community of people who worked for the rich. And she got a job. Unbelievably, I found her in the New York census. She was a maid in the Carnegie Mansion when she was 18 years old. So a maid in one of the richest homes in America. That's his mother. And those two things together. Oh, and then the mother, when she had him, he was the second to the last child. And then she had her last child, Robert, and she had a terrible pregnancy or birth and was in the hospital for like a year afterwards. Little Donald was 2. Grandma, who's this harsh, old world German woman steps in, and I'm not a shrink, but my psychologist friends say that at that age, when you lose your primary caretaker, you get really messed up. And that's part of what's happened to him. So, but basically it's his childhood. These women were speaking with these accents. And so of course he gravitates then to Ivana and then later to Melania. And I mean, just surrounded by immigrants, again, like the hypocrisy of blaming. And again, we know why, because they're white immigrants. So that's okay.
I don't know. I mean, Hitler didn't really look Aryan, did he? I mean, this is what they do. I mean, this is the.
No, they just need a scapegoat. I mean,
Yeah.
I think if it was, if we lived in a different time and they were blaming the Germans for the problems or the Irish, I mean, look, the Italians, you're Italian, right?
Yeah.
Every wave of new coming Americans has faced the already here yanking up the ladder. And then they become part of our society, and they change and they become, that's the great thing. The beauty of our country is that we do have the Elon Musks who can build things and who come over here and do things, and we mix, and there's this vitality, and that's why we're having these problems in our politics. In one way, it's a healthy thing that we're constantly talking about, but again, a lot of people are not talking about it. They're just sort of imbibing the bullshit from the demagogue. And we're very vulnerable to that.
All right. So I'm at the point in the podcast. I'm going to read out 5 words. You're going to respond to the 5 words. I'm going to say the word. You're going to say whatever comes to your mind. Okay, you ready?
Okay. All right.
All right. I see you smiling, so I know this is going to be good. All right. So I say the word Harris. You think what?
Competent.
Okay. Yeah, moderate to me. I say a moderate, actually, Also, someone that builds a big tent, believe it or not, If Bernie Sanders, Anthony Scaramucci, and Liz and Dick Cheney walked into a bar. Now, I don't have the punchline, Nina, but you get the point, right? She's a tent builder. Okay, I say November 5th. Now, my British friends would say Guy Fawkes Day, but November 5th is election day. You say what?
Tension.
Say again?
Tension.
Okay, yeah, it's almost like a cold civil war happening on election day, right? We're going to see where the country ends up. Okay, this is sort of 2 words. J.D. Vance. Let's call it 3 words. J.D. Vance. Made up name, but he's running for, right? He's changed his name 3 or 4 times. J.D. Vance.
Well, you gave me 3, so I'm going to give you 2. Hollow man.
Yeah. He's going to get destroyed by Trump, by the way. You mark my words. Nobody survives being that close to Trump. Okay, Trump women. Say Trump women. You say what?
Stilettos.
Okay. All right, last word. And you're going to have the last word in this podcast, but the last word is 1 word. It's 1 syllable. I say Trump. You say what?
Oh, man. 1 word.
No, you don't have to say 1 word. I'm giving you 1 word. You can give me a sentence or 2. Go ahead.
Orc. Oaf.
See, the
Epstein.
problem, but the problem I have with Trump, if you don't mind me saying, is that he's indicative of something that's happening in the society. There's something going on in the society that bubbles up, and Trump is the leader of it. You see what I mean? I don't think Trump barked it down to the people. Maybe he barked it down to some of the people, but they were there. They were the Tea Party movement. They were
absolutely
the radicals in 2000. They were there, Nina. They weren't. They were Charles Lindbergh's followers in the 1930s, right?
Absolutely. And that's why I think, again, it's not the Russians. Stop blaming the Russians for what we have in our own society. We have this movement, we have this tendency, and he is just very good at picking up, almost like with antennae. I mean, he is. I watched him last night. I don't know if you watched I don't watch his rallies, but I watched last night the talk. It went on for a long time, but he is, he's got this like Sinatra croon thing going on, right? That is so oleaginous, and it's sort of, it is weirdly charming when you're watching it in some ways. but he's just picking up from the crowd, and he doesn't want to leave the stage. You could see it. Like I was sitting here falling asleep. I'm like, people must be wanting to stumble out of there. It's getting really boring. He keeps going back, and he doesn't know when to leave because he feeds on that love. It's fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating, and it's sad. And it's hopefully will end well for us.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I think, we'll get through it one way or the other. But
I think we will too.
Nina Burleigh, it's great to talk to you. 2 books, The Zero Visibility Possible and The Trump Women. Thank you for joining Open Book.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you.